This is the tragic story of Paige Doherty from Clydebank, Scotland, and how she was brutally murdered by delicious Deli shop owner John Leathem. 10 years on from the death of Paige, we look to retell her story. The story really begins on March 18th, 2016. Paige was said to be stopping at a friend's house. Paige again was said to be in high spirits, and during the stopover was doing both her friend's nails and hair. It was said to be that Paige had a wide and great fascination in the beauty industry, and she was hoping to complete her beauty course and eventually become a beautician. And so, March 19th, 2016, Paige wakes from her friend's house, and on this day, she has work. Now, what Paige does is she takes her normal journey. She walks onto the avenue of Clydebank, where there's a row of shops, and on that row of shops, there's both a convenience store and a Deli shop. Just across the road from the shops, on the avenue of Clydebank, there's a bus stop, and Paige often takes the bus to work. Now, CCTV footage is pivotal in the investigation of both the disappearance and the murder of Paige. Later on in the video, I'll touch on how detectives and police took hold of the CCTV footage and were able to determine what had happened to Paige. But for the summary of what happened, I'll continue. Now, at precisely 8:21 on the avenue, the convenience store CCTV footage shows Paige walking past the convenience store, waving to the convenience store owner, and then entering the delicious Deli shop owned by none other than John Leathem. The footage, to the surprise of many, doesn't show Paige coming out of the Deli shop, but what it does show is precisely 10 minutes later, so 8:31, the owner of the Deli shop, in a rush, coming out of his premises and going in to the convenience store. Now, the CCTV footage shows that John Leathem, when entering the convenience store, looks full of anxiety, he's in a rush, and he looks to be quite fidgety. The footage then shows him coming out of the convenience store and going back in to his Deli premises. Through investigation, detectives were able to see that John Leathem had purchased 3 items from the convenience store. He'd purchased bleach, wipes, and bin bags. What detectives were able to witness next from the convenience CCTV footage was harrowing. Precisely an hour and 5 minutes later, John Leathem leaves the premises of his Deli shop. He rushes across the road where he's seen to get into his vehicle. He then reverses his vehicle towards his Deli shop. He leaves the vehicle, he walks to the back of the vehicle where he opens his boot, and as seen on CCTV, he then runs into his Deli shop. Only 3 minutes later is where detectives explain what they saw next. John Leathem is seen carrying what is said to be quite a large bin bag, and on the footage, he's struggling to carry it. The police, while they describe something that's just brutal, the detectives on the CCTV footage witness a foot hanging out of the bin bag. Now, we know this to be of Paige. John Leathem then gets back into his vehicle and is seen rushing off, heading west. So I know what you're thinking. Where is John Leathem going with Paige? Well, detectives again were able to identify that only 22 minutes later, John Leathem arrives at his home. Now, John Leathem is a family man. He's married, and his wife and his child live with him at his family home. Detectives were able to find that John Leathem took Paige from his boot and put Paige in his garden shed. So what we know at this point, that clearly John Leathem is involved in the murder and disappearance of Paige. We have both CCTV footage of him entering a convenience store and buying bleach, wipes and bin bags. And of course, we've got the CCTV footage of him coming out of his Deli premises, holding Paige, of which Paige looks to be wrapped in a bin bag. Now, what John Leathem decides to do next is to flee the scene of Clyde Bank and to flee Scotland. He tells his family, he tells his wife that they're going on a road trip. And so John Leathem heads south 60 miles and he stops with his family in a hotel overnight. Whilst this is all happening, 8 hours have passed and Paige's mum, boyfriend and friend from the sleepover the night before have had no contact with Paige. Alarm bells begin to ring and suspicions run high. Both her mum, her friend and boyfriend begin to trace Paige's last steps. And only 9 hours later, Paige's mum decides to report her as a missing person. On the 20th of March 2016, John Leathem returns from his trip with his family. Upon returning, it's said to be that detectives were able to identify that John Leathem moved Paige from his garden shed back in to the boot of his vehicle. At this point, John Leathem was making one last effort to conceal the horrific ordeal that he'd put Paige through. John Leathem, in his vehicle, with Paige in the boot, headed east of Clyde Bank. Now, the police were able to track his whereabouts. And again, through investigation and CCTV footage, they were able to see that John Leathem headed east only 1.5 miles from his Deli store. John Leathem pulled up in a lay-by where there was said to be a woodland area, and John Leathem took Paige out of his boot, still in the bin bag, and walked what was said to be around 20 feet. It's said to be that he then laid Paige down in a grassy field and attempted to cover Paige in what was said to be branches and leaves. What he did next was unthinkable. John Leathem decided that he was now going to get on with his day. He returned to his Deli shop, and it's said to be that he continued working for 2.5 hours, serving customers. Only 2 hours later, Paige's body was discovered by a person that was walking the woodland. The police, well, they were able to identify Paige almost immediately, and so opened what was now a murder investigation and not a missing person. Suspicions all pointed into the direction of John Leathem, notwithstanding the pivotal CCTV footage that the convenience store owner was able to provide to police. Now, of course, as we've touched on, the footage showed the last known sightings of Paige, 8:21 on the 19th of March 2016. We saw Paige on the avenue and enter the Deli shop. The footage showed police that Paige doesn't come out of the Deli shop. Instead, only 10 minutes later, John Leathem goes in to the convenience store where he happens to purchase, suspiciously, bleach, wipes and bin bags. As suspicions mounted, the police, of course, decided to arrest John Leathem. And so, at this time, what was happening in Clyde Bank on the avenue was something that locals had never seen before. Police, they cornered off the avenue and they put up investigation tents. The locals, well, they could see that investigation was surrounding John Lathem's Deli store. And so what they did, they linked him to the disappearance and death of Paige. And so it's said to be that the locals decided to attack John Lathem's home, meaning both his wife and his child had to flee. Paige was found to have had over 100 stab wounds to her face. On the 24th of March 2016, whilst in custody, John Leathem was questioned. Now, John Latham's story throughout questioning changes quite a lot. Initially, he tells detectives he doesn't even recognise Paige. His story later changes, where he says to detectives, yes, I do know that girl, and she comes in often, but I'd not seen her that day. And his final account, detectives explain that he did agree to knowing Paige, but his account was very different of that of which we know and that of which you can witness on CCTV. He explains that Paige had come into the Deli shop, she'd collected her normal breakfast roll and told John Leathem that she was heading off to work, of which we all know this to be a fantasy in John Latham's head, because we know truly that he was involved in the murder of Paige. On the 5th of September 2016, John Leathem finally admitted to the murder of Paige Doherty. He gave his guilty plea to the courts. On October the 12th, 2016, John Leathem was sentenced to the murder of Paige Doherty. He was given a life sentence with a minimum term to serve of 27 years. Now, this is the part of the video where you come in. I want your comments in the comment section down below, because only around 5 years ago, John Leathem appealed his sentencing and he was successful. His 27-year sentence was reduced to a minimum of 23 years. Let me know in the comment section down below what you think of that. And so the all-important question that only really John Leathem knows, why on the 19th of March 2016 did he murder Paige Doherty? His only and final account, coming after his guilty plea, was again absolutely atrocious and a fantasy in his mind. His account is that he was recruiting for his Deli store. Now, on the morning of the 19th of March 2016, John Leathem advises that at 8:21, Paige enters the Deli store and he interviewed her for a position at the Deli shop as an assistant. John Leathem explains that he denied Paige as an applicant for the position. He tries to advise that Paige become violent and told John Leathem that if you don't give me a position, I'm going to ruin your life and report you to the police. I'm going to tell the police that you've touched me. This is the horrendous explanation that John Leathem gives for the brutal murder of Paige. Now, of course, you watching this video, we all know this to be untrue. We know the path that Paige was on. She was on a career path of becoming a beautician. She had started college and she was often doing both her friends' and family's nails, makeup and hair. So why would she decide to apply for a position in John Lathem's Deli store? It just doesn't make sense. So that was the story of Paige Doherty. It's now been 10 years on since her murder. Let me know as a viewer in the comment section down below, what do you think of this story? And what do you think about his sentence being appealed, successfully reducing his minimum term to 23 years?